In his 2021 comedy special, Inside, Burnham discusses a strikingly broad range of topics, from the impact of coronavirus on the comedy industry to the need for humour in the face of looming climate catastrophe. Yet all the while, Burnham centres his discussion around the effects of digital technologies on social order and its effect on our capacity for identity. This comes to a head at a particularly powerful moment in the special, when he sings a line equal parts hilarious and arresting. "You say the ocean's rising, like I give a shit. You say the whole world's ending, honey, it already did." While far from the first comedian to discuss climate change, social breakdown, and digital technology's role in all this, there is a sense that Burnham's timely Inside is speaking for a large body of people, perhaps most specifically those finding it difficult to know how best to live in 2021 amidst a global pandemic, environmental and social crises. While the line I mentioned before is likely meant as a throwaway joke and not intended to hold up to close scrutiny, there are numerous valid reasons to support Burnham's feelings. As both the UK and the US continue to struggle with the lasting impact of coronavirus, alongside ongoing discussions at COP26 and the conclusions reached in 2021's IPCC report, it's hard not to wonder if the world, or at least some version of it, might really be coming to an end. This feeling is augmented, amplified, and disseminated at breakneck pace on a global scale through digital technologies that intimately affect our sense of self and community. Humanity is dealing with unprecedented challenges while grappling with technology, the full extent of whose impact we can't possibly understand. If we attempt to take as objective a view of the situation as we can, things don't look great for humanity right now. So much so that it doesn't seem too crazy to genuinely ask, has the world really ended? And if it has, is it technology's fault?
Part 1. They say the whole world's ending. Trying to take Burnham as seriously as possible here, to see to what extent the statement, "the whole world's ending," can be viewed as true, I first need to pick some kind of definition of the world. A good place to start with this is probably to look at a scientific definition of the world, something that contemporary physicists would maybe agree on if they were pushed. For our contemporary scientists, the universe is either spatially infinite or finite in a manner that is functionally identical to infinity. According to this article from The Conversation, we can either think of the universe as not having edges, or as having edges that curve back onto themselves. If the Big Crunch theory is to be believed, there's a possibility that this infinite, or effectively infinite space, could also be temporally infinite, as gravity could eventually force all of the matter back into a singularity, enabling a new Big Bang. Alternatively, according to the theory of the Big Freeze, the universe could eventually run out of energy and become a vast and endless void. But this wouldn't be for an extremely long time. So, to get us started, if our definition of the world is based on contemporary physics, then no. The world, our universe, and the 200 billion trillion stars within it are fine, and will continue to be fine for a very, very long time. However, most people don't tend to view the world this way, or else take very little comfort from this understanding. Indeed, only a very few humans on the planet today do a decent job of thinking of Earth as the world. Ecological thinkers like Greta Thunberg, George Monbiot, David Suzuki and David Attenborough, not to mention the late James Lovelock and Rachel Carson, sit alongside contemporary philosophers like Timothy Morton, Bruno Latour, Jane Bennett and Louise Amour, to mention but a few, as examples of people doing their utmost to consider the planet as a complex web of enmeshed systems, and to consider this their singular world. As Burnham mentions the rise of ocean levels, it's maybe a good idea to begin with an examination of the possibility that climate change may be ending the world, at least as ecologists think of it, as the dynamic systems that enable life on this planet Earth. While there are a range of different opinions on this topic, looking at a critical review of various scientific studies of climate models, it doesn't look very good. Many of the ecologists mentioned earlier, and climate scientists alike, concede that it is too late to do anything to completely reverse climate change. Indeed, the now infamous 2018 paper, Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene, makes it clear that it is difficult to identify an exact threshold past which a feedback loop might occur, causing global warming and species extinction to get out of control. It is likely that we are already in the very early stages of climate catastrophe, and as yearly death tolls attributable to climate migration continue to climb, it seems like an incalculable level of human suffering might already be underway. A World Health Organization risk assessment estimated hundreds of thousands of deaths as a result of climate migration as early as 2050. Estimates such as these have given rise to a paranoia in global governments that there's a risk of being overrun by climate migrants. This has resulted in tighter border policies that'll in turn only exacerbate the existing problems. It seems then, once we start thinking about worlds, even on the scale of our planet, that the end of our planet started some time ago. For most people, however, even thinking about the scale of our one planet is simply too much to deal with on an everyday basis. Instead, we prefer to limit our lives to only the relationships around us that are essential for our survival and our enjoyment. One helpful concept for the way most people consider the world is the notion of Umwelt, popularized by biologist Jakob Johann von Uexküll. An organism's Umwelt is the section of the world that is able to usefully make sense of and to utilize. Von Uexküll, for instance, considered the Umwelt of creatures such as ticks and sea urchins, and put forth a notion of different beings having a sense of the world defined by the interactions that allow them to live and to thrive. The environment of a sea urchin might contain fish, boats, and rain clouds, but to the sea urchin, to whom none of this will ever be of any useful consequence, the world, its Umwelt, is defined just by the rocks and the seabed that enable and define its existence. We humans tend to have an incredibly inflated sense of our own importance, so we might fall into the trap of believing that we no longer have an Umwelt, but instead that we see the world as it truly is. This is something to avoid as much as possible, and luckily, it's easy to do. To find your Umwelt, you just need to immerse yourself in a culture or community that you, on the outset at least, fundamentally disagree with. For instance, you might have thought that that dress was definitely black and blue, not white and gold. Or that this sound is definitely Yanni, not Laurel. Well, this is something of a post-human rereading of von Uexküll's theories, like that of Jeffrey Winthrop Young's from 2010. It's hard not to think that your eyes, your ears, and the relationship your body has to the technology you can access or else afford must generate some kind of a specific biotechnological Umwelt. Something like that anyway, that's specifically yours. Let's put this a different way. Let's think about the difference between two physically similar but ideologically opposed humans. You, for instance, might believe that the world is about more than just profit. You might think that the world must also have ethical considerations and compassion for our fellow beings. Let's say that you're an active person in your local community, and you do your best to raise money for charities, to vote for left-wing political parties, and to regularly use digital technology to support these feelings and actions, by accessing political websites and online charities like justgiving.com. Your experience of the world seems to support your feelings, as your friends and maybe even your family validate your opinions, and you're doing good deeds, at least as you see them, feel good in your body, supporting your view that you're acting correctly. However, for famous economists like Milton Friedman, and incredibly influential free market economists, profit is all that really matters. This because, to Friedman and those who follow his economic principles, companies, and this includes even medical institutions, making profit enables them to better take care of their employees and their customers, even if those customers happen to also be called patients or tenants. For instance, the solution to healthcare problems, Friedman argues, is to address what he views as a lack of privatization in the healthcare system. Friedman views the world through models and charts, accessed through different uses of digital technology, and he positions his body in spaces and places that support his views on the importance of profit. To Milton Friedman, his view of the world supports his feelings about it. Milton Friedman is no different to a sea urchin perceiving the sea floor as it relates to its experience. Friedman and right-wing economists very likely see the world through the filter of technological systems of profit and loss, and physical environments that echo these systems. This view of the world, Friedman's view, might make you uncomfortable. It might even feel wrong to you, but that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It might just be outside of your worldview, outside of your Umwelt. To this, we might think about our individual world, or Umwelt, as defined by our connections to cultures and communities. Political scientist Benedict Anderson has been enormously influential in this manner of thinking, encouraging us to understand feelings of patriotism and nationalism as rooted within a shared imagination of a specific place or history. This imagined community can help to keep people functionally operating together towards a shared purpose, though what they believe they're fighting for or working towards may not objectively exist. Party to this, the late great Zygmunt Bauman put it another way in his book, Community, Seeking Safety in an Insecure World. He wrote, "In short, community stands for the kind of world which is not, regrettably, available to us, but which we would dearly wish to inhabit and which we hope to repossess." Community, then, is a charged term for many that triggers actions and emotions rather than being anything that genuinely exists. If we think of our Umwelt, then, as defined by our communities, then there are various ways in which it might well seem as if these worlds have come to an end in the last few years. As Burnham's special was in part a reaction to the events of the coronavirus pandemic, we can fruitfully consider just how deeply COVID has changed human culture. COVID-19 has caused over 3 million deaths and has led to a decrease in economic activity and rising unemployment rates. There have been reports that the pandemic is also affecting other health outcomes. These may include delayed diagnosis and treatments, mental health problems, suicide, and excess mortality in general. However, COVID also enabled working from home, which has been compared by some to something similar to a 19th century agrarian economy, only this time with Netflix. For those who enjoyed spending time with their families, returning to an older life of commuting to an office hasn't seemed like ample temptation. This has given rise to the accelerating Great Resignation of 2021 that sees more people choosing to leave their jobs to focus on their families over their careers. This relates to a shift in many humans' perceptions of their community and similar shift in values because of this. For many, the the pandemic allowed a much closer sense of community based around family and those close to us. And as returning to cities and workplaces threatens this, we begin to dearly wish to inhabit and repossess that sense of family-based community that was possible for some families during various stages of national lockdowns. However, in a way, this isn't just a result of COVID. As mentioned before, Burnham's other preoccupation is digital technology more generally. Throughout Inside, as in his songs Welcome to the Internet and Content, he highlights how networking technology has deeply impacted on human perceptions of value, privacy, and rights. This feeling is supported by many academics, such as Shoshana Zuboff and Bernard Stiegler, to name two off of an extremely long list. However, very few have put this feeling in such certain terms as Andrew V. Edwards, one-time CEO and pioneering digital marketer, and co-founder of the Digital Analytics Association. Edwards' book, The Digital is Destroying Everything, takes a common sense but no-nonsense approach to some of the most important topics of today. In the chapter, The Lonely Screen, Digital is Destroying Human Interaction, for instance, Edwards observes all of the great things about working from home and the increased happiness and productivity it can unleash. However, he quickly counters this by observing how large media corporations like Facebook have radically rewritten the rules in the way that humans engage and socialize, and warns of how Facebook operates with enormous power and little legislation determining what they can and cannot do. Given that Edwards' book was published in early 2015, it's equal parts encouraging and upsetting that it took until 2019 for Facebook to be taken to task for misuses of data, and only this year have laws been set in place that will force Facebook to delete content globally should a government demand it. The point, however, remains that long before COVID, the introduction of network platforms for communication had irrevocably reshaped the ways humans communicate.
If we think of the world as defined by our growing knowledge of anthropogenic warming, it suggests that the end of the world has already begun. At the same time, however, if we think of the world as defined by our sense of community, digital technology has already indelibly changed human ideas of interaction, only to be exacerbated by the spread of working from home that COVID necessitated. In more than one way then, Bo Burnham seems correct. The world has indeed come to an end. There is, however, something else that Burnham mentioned that is, I think, worth discussing. That is the idea that while the world has come to an end, this might not be the first time.